Yes, let's get this underway. Thank you, everyone, and all of those who are logging in right now. We're excited to have this fantastic team from Geisinger talking to us today about integrating the basic sciences into the clinical phase of medical education. And a big thanks to Bill Jeffries for connecting us so that way we could get this robust group together. So with that, I will hand it over to you, John, to introduce your team and yourself, and we'll go from there.
Great. And, if you're not happy with this, you can blame Bill Jeffries. So hello, everyone. Welcome to the next in the series, a clinical faculty development series offered by the Alliance for Clinical Education. I'm John Szarek, professor of pharmacology and vice chair for curriculum from Geisinger Commonwealth School of Medicine. The rest of the team will introduce themselves shortly. Today, we will discuss integration of foundational sciences into the clinical phases. Before we get started, some housekeeping. So CME statements, credit statement, disclosure, clinical faculty development series, a little bit of the goal and background, the series 101 and 201 titles and dates that they were presented, recordings are available. These are some of the upcoming presentations in the 301 series that are listed here. And this brings us to our team today. This slide shows the pictures of our team and presenters for today's session. We are members of the clinical education and the foundational education subcommittees of our school's medical curriculum committee. We form the work group who is leading the work on integration of foundational sciences into the clinical phases. Each member of the team will introduce themselves now, starting with Devon.
Thanks so much, Dr. Szarek. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us. My name is Devon Bremer, and I'm the Director of Clinical Education Administration, working primarily in our clinical curriculum.
Hello, everybody. My name is Igor Danelisen. I'm an associate professor of pathology. I'm also a longitudinal content lead for pathology in the phase 1, phase 2 of our curriculum.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Jennifer Kessler. I'm a professor of pediatrics and associate dean for medical student education.
Hi, I'm Brytanie Marshall. I serve as the assistant chair for undergraduate medical education and focus on the clinical portion of the OBGYN content.
Hello, my name is Ashley Shamansky, and I'm the assistant chair of undergraduate pediatric medical education.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shubhra Shetty. I'm a professor of medicine, and I got involved in this in my capacity as chair of the Clinical Education Committee, working closely with John as the chair of the foundational aspect.
Hi, everyone. My name is Margaret Shoemaker, and I am the assistant chair of undergraduate internal medicine education.
Hi, you already heard about John, so I'm next. My name is Gabi Waite. I'm the vice chair of education and professor of physiology and immunology, and like Dr. Danelisen, oversee physiology and pathophysiology longitudinally across the 4 years of UME.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jen Zangardi. I'm an assistant professor of medicine. I'm an internist by trade, and I am the co-course director of our physician and patient-centered care course, which is essentially the interviewing clinical skills.
Thank you, everyone. So that's our team and presenters for today. But before we dig in, we thought it'd be helpful to get some information on our participants for today's session. So we're going to be using Poll Everywhere, and we have 4 questions which are going to come up on the next slides starting now. Okay, so it looks like we're still getting a little few responses here, but almost 2/3 of the participants today are do teach pre-clerkship, so that's interesting. And then there are some individuals here that are either doing all 3 or 2 of them anyway, and then also clerkship and post-clerkship. So welcome, and this will be a great discussion today since we're going to be talking about integration. Next question.
What do you need, buddy?
All right, so it looks like almost all of us have curriculums, the pre-clerkship phase anyway, that are about a year and a half. So there's one or two people, it looks like, that have a pre-clerkship that's less than 15 months. Okay, so a few of you are about a quarter. There's nothing planned or implemented. Looks like for over half of us today, a renewal's in process or in the planning stages, and then about a quarter have just completed a renewal. So we're all kind of in the same boat here in terms of curriculum renewals. Finally, last question. Okay, so we're close to 50-50 here in terms of agreeing or disagreeing in terms of intentionally integrating foundational science into the clerkship. So this should be great discussion with everyone this afternoon.
When you were chair.
Thank you for the responses. It seems that we do have a very group of educators, a lot of preclinical phase teachers today, and we look forward to an engaging session. By the end of this session, you should value the importance of foundational science in medicine, be able to discuss strategies for integrating foundational science across the phases, and then identifying some barriers and possible solutions to integration. Before we get started any further, we'll get a little background on our school from Devon.
Thanks so much, Dr. Szarek, and good afternoon again, everyone. We thought it was important to give just a little bit of background about the institution and about how our curriculum was developed. And so our institution was established in 2008 as an independent, not-for-profit allopathic medical school called the Commonwealth Medical College. The medical school curriculum was first developed as a traditional 2-in-2, with students completing their first 2 years of foundational basic science curriculum at our main campus in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and then 2 years of clinical education at any one of our regional campuses. It's important to note that in 2017, we did integrate with the Geisinger Health System and became the Geisinger Commonwealth School of Medicine. Through this integration, we have been able to deliver the clinical curriculum at now 5 established regional campuses, as you can see here on our campus map. Our 3 Geisinger campuses, meaning our students complete their rotations within the Geisinger Health System, are our Northeast campus, our Central campus, and our West campus. And then we have 2 other campuses that are established through collaborative partnerships with other health systems, one being the Guthrie Health System and then Atlanticare Health System in southeastern New Jersey. Over the years, we've made some general modifications to our curriculum, but recently went through our formal curriculum renewal to develop the total health curriculum, which we will review next. And so our total health curriculum includes a 3-phased integrated curriculum approach, which is represented here by our tree of knowledge. The roots of the curriculum, or our foundation, is the principles of medical science and practice. This portion is about 18 months and includes 3 main components. Our basic science is our integrated systems-based blocks, which uses a clinical presentation model for delivery. We then have our doctoring course, which is a physician and patient-centered care. And then students have early exposure to the clinical learning environment through a longitudinal clinical experience in primary care. As we work our way up the tree, the trunk represents our core clinical immersion phase, where our students complete their clerkship rotations. This phase of the curriculum is about 12 months and includes 3 components as well. Students will first have a transitional course called the Transition to Clerkships, which really helps students acclimate to the clinical learning environment. Then students will complete 5 8-week clerkship blocks in core areas of family medicine, internal medicine, OBGYN, pediatrics, psychiatry, neurology, and surgery. And the year will end with another transition course called Transition to Phase 3. And that phase, which is represented by the tree branches and leaves, is our career differentiation and exploration phase. This is where our students culminate their medical school experience with some core required rotations, and they complete a variety of different electives. Students will then end their year with a final transitional course called Transition to Residency to help them get acclimated to graduate medical education. This phase is currently still in transition, and so once finally under the total health curriculum will be a total of 16 months. And with that, I'll toss it back to John.
Thank you, Devon. This slide shows the agenda for today's session. Gary asked that we start by briefly bringing the topic of integration up to date from when the guidebook was published. Today's topic was covered extensively in Chapter 8 by Drs. Raska and Jeffries in the 5th edition, which was published in 2019. The main takeaway from their chapter was that there is no single best way to integrate foundational sciences into the clinical curriculum, but they did outline elements to consider for integration and modes of integration of basic and clinical science, which are summarized on this slide. We will not go through these individually, but take a moment to read through them. Since publication, many schools have undertaken a curriculum and a curriculum renewal, and depending on, based on the survey results today, we see that there are schools that are currently renewing their curriculum or plan to. These 3 recent papers are informative regarding integration of foundational science into the clinical phase. And some of you have probably already seen these, but those of you who are looking into curriculum renewal, these have some great details in them that you'll want to follow up on. The main takeaway is that there's no single best way to integrate foundational sciences into the clinical curriculum. This slide breaks down the key points into elements to consider for integration and modes of integration as we discussed with the guidebook chapter. Take a moment to read through them. You probably recognize that the essence of what was discussed in the guidebook chapter is very similar to what we have seen here with these 3 papers. We encourage you to review these papers for more details. So why are we going through all of this effort? Some of the reasoning is captured in these 3 quotes. Students will need to bring foundational science concepts to patient care, but to do this, we will have to help students recognize the connections through teams of clinical and foundational science faculty working together. This has been the essence of our work at Geisinger Commonwealth. Gabi and Brytanie now will take us through the next item on the agenda regarding our curriculum renewal.
Yeah, thank you, John. So for this, our next agenda item, we will tell you our approach on how to integrate foundational sciences in a clerkship curriculum as part of the curriculum renewal here at GCSOM. So however, before we do that, we would like to hear from you about your ideas and approaches. So for that, you will be randomly assigned to a Zoom breakout room. And we ask you to discuss for 5 minutes how foundational science and clinical faculty can work together to align foundational sciences longitudinally throughout the foundational science and clinical phases. So you should see a timer at the right upper corner when you are in the breakout room. If you don't see that, please just be conscientious of the time. And please take the last minute to prioritize one example of your group that you then tell the large group, in which we will capture in this empty box that you see at the bottom of the slide. So are there any questions before we send you into the Zoom breakout rooms? Hearing none, I don't see anything in the chat room. Then Gary, I would ask you to do some magic and send the attendance into the breakout rooms. We see each other all in 5 minutes again.
Devon, Peggy, Jen, I don't know if you want to join. Oh, I guess Jen decided to join a breakout room. Otherwise, you can remain here in the main room.
Okay. I just have to respond to something, so if it's okay, I'll stay here.
Yeah.
Would you like me to join?
We'd like to do now. So we're recording again. So welcome back, everyone. What we'd like to do now is capture just very briefly, one example of how this can be accomplished from each of the teams. So someone start us off.
Sure, I was in group, I believe we were breakout room 3, and our group came up with pretty diverse examples of how there's been attempts at addressing this. One way was having students engage in a reflection exercise. So as they go through the clinical realm, stopping, pausing, thinking about how it was reflected in that clinical experience. And then that reflection was actually given back to the basic science faculty, where they were able to get direct feedback after the student has gone through the clinical experience. And so that was a big win for that institution.
Great. Next.
I can jump in. Sorry?
No,
I don't want to jump. Thank you. No, just briefly, like we had a very extensive discussion. It was really very interesting to hear different things. I can't tell you my group number because number of the room is gone to my head. But what it is which one? Where do we want? Thank you. So we discussed and we had a lot of interesting, but one of the things is also utilization of concept mapping, which will help then promote the integration for sure in the later years. We had also very interesting example of utilization of index cards, which is known as an accountability model. So which all the students will be provided index cards, which will then require them to to go back and discuss the basic science concepts or pathophysiology or pathology of different conditions as they see. And the last was also utilization of online modules, which contains basic science as well as potentially a direct interaction.
Great, thank you. And last.
Our group had 2 suggestions. One was from Dr. Grippo at Belmont. They create objectives that are integrative. They're intentionally integrative between the basic and clinical sciences. That helps them with their activities. And the other suggestion was to make sure you have teams of foundational scientists and clinicians working together and have the foundational sciences there for the bedside activities to participate actively.
Great. All right, some excellent suggestions, and I think a lot of these were some ideas that were talked about in the paper as well as in the chapter, the papers as well as in the book chapter that Dr. Jeffries and Raska published. So we'll carry on next, Dr. Waite and Marshall.
Dr.
Yeah,
Marshall?
Yes. So as a general overview of the way that we at Geisinger Commonwealth School of Medicine kind of approached this problem, which I think resonates with each of us on the line, we face challenges and we face some wins. We had a charge with our medical curriculum committee that gets together to oversee the full curriculum from day one through graduation of the medical education for students at Geisinger, where we were challenged with this and said, hey, we need to incorporate this into the clerkships, but let's do it in a tangible way. During our phase 2 core clinical experience, we have different course directors for each curriculum. Each of us, that is for each block, whether it's OB or pediatrics, medicine, we are all active clinical faculty supervising this clerkship, giving it an immersive experience. So we paired up with our colleagues within the foundational sciences. We all got in one room and brought the key stakeholders to the table, representation from pharmacology, anatomy, physiology, immunology, the list goes on. So we worked collectively to talk about what's already there. So we were paired up, one foundations per one clerkship director, and we sat down and said, what do I already have within my clerkship that reflects foundational science? How can we better tease that out? And then how do we make it a discrete element? So as you saw with our tree analogy, the roots of the foundational science was actually used as our symbol. So anytime we gave a quiz or anytime there was a reading or a didactic or some kind of call out, the student was able to recognize that symbol to say, hey, this is a basic science and look at how you're seeing it used here in the clinical format. Most of this was intuitive and most of the work was more just making it a discrete element so that the student can readily recognize what was being put before them. By partnering with the director of the clerkship who created the immersive experience, it was able to be more intimately integrated. So we did this in multiple ways, usually through low risk quizzes, self-assessments, brought into the didactics. Each clerkship had a different representation that best fit the learning environment for the student, thus making it far more organic and allows it to continue to be implemented within. So while it's informed through a partnership of our foundational experts, along with the integration in the clinical clerkship with the key stakeholder, we have had success so far. And we have launched this year with excellent feedback from students recognizing a large percentage, which I know John will discreetly go over, a large percentage of students have recognized that this is happening within their clerkship and they're able to see it more readily integrated.
Thank you. So I think some of what Brytanie mentioned was already captured in some of the suggestions that we came up with in the last breakout room where we talked about working in teams of foundational science and clinicians. So moving right along, our next activity will be led by Dr. Shoemaker and Zangardi.
So in a few minutes, we'll show you exactly those routes and how we made it available, made it known to the students that they were receiving foundational, or just reminded them they were receiving foundational science in those clerkships. But right now we're going to do another small group activity for 5 minutes. And what we would like for you to discuss is how your school highlights foundational science in the clerkships currently. So if we could go to our breakout rooms for 5 minutes, and then we will come back and talk about it.
All right, welcome back, everyone. So let's just quickly capture an example from each group. So who's starting us off?
I'll go with group 3.
Okay, thanks, Leanne.
Sure. One example is from our school, upstate, SUNY Upstate. We embarked on this a number of years ago, created this backpack project where students would have a module that they would do, which would remind them that they had their backpack with them, which was full of their foundational sciences, and that they should draw on it. Some of them were good, so there was like one per clerkship. And they worked with basic science faculty from the pre-clerkship years to build these. Some were good, actually a couple are excellent, some are not. And they never went farther than that. So this was probably like 8 years ago, and they are now kind of tired and worn. And so it was successful. I would say initially students didn't though think about it any more than they did that case. And so we're trying to rehaul ours. And also someone uses UWorld questions, someone in our group, they use UWorld questions and give a certain number, and the students get them programmed to be sent to them to prompt them to do reconsider some of their basic science material.
Great, thank you. Who's next?
I can share from group 1.
Thank you.
I think what we recognized was that this is really hard. And we discussed a little bit about how the efforts to bring foundational sciences into the clerkships it is a big hill to climb, and that trying to brand it really has been quite elusive for many.
Okay, thank you.
I would add from group 1 that Sarah from UNC mentioned they have a formative examination in basic science. Low stakes, but there is a kind of accountability.
Great, thank you. All right, last group. Going once, going twice. Okay, so we'll go on then. So a couple good suggestions here. It seems like, again, highlighting it and bringing foundational sciences, there's still not a really good way yet. So with that, we'll jump into the what Dr. Marshall already alluded to, and this will be led by Dr. Shoemaker and Zangardi.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, John. And yeah, Brytanie did already go over our logo here for our new total health curriculum. So just to review, we have the roots, we have the trunk, and we have the branches and leaves. And in this case, the roots are that foundational science or the principles of medical science and practice. So we borrowed this logo as a visible marker of a, hey, students, this is that foundational science that we've been talking about integrating and bringing to your attention. So, for example, in internal medicine, at the end of the clerkship, we have a virtual synchronous interactive session that I've called a CPC, that has 3 cases that emphasize content learned in internal medicine. This happens to be the learning objective slide from that session. Initially, it was the 3 learning objectives, but then as we worked to integrate foundational science, we added that 4th learning objective along with the logo to say, hey, let's watch for this logo as it appears. In these 3 cases, I think we've been able to seamlessly integrate the foundational sciences. Just very briefly, because Brytanie's already talked about how we label the slide, and you see that down there we have the roots to say, hey, this is foundational science. But in the case, for example, of a patient presenting with chest pain, the students will navigate the case together, identify that the patient has unstable angina, and EKG options for EKGs are then chosen by the students to represent that patient during exercise. And then the next question will be for them, which coronary artery is then impacted based on that EKG. And then we get to a slide like this that shows a cross-section of coronary arteries, and the students will identify whether this patient has atherosclerosis with a stable vessel lining, or if they have an acute clot. And again, basic science, but rather seamlessly integrated. Next. And in this process, we then follow up with teaching slides, and we continue to emphasize the basic science logo. So it's like, just reaffirmation that we are hitting those basic sciences and linking them specifically to the clinical setting.
Thank you, Peggy. So we'll get into a little summary of the preliminary results so far, and Drs. Danelisen and Shamansky will talk about our preliminary results.
Yes, so since we have implemented this in our phase 2, our students have completed 3 clerkship blocks. What we have found is that about 94% of our students strongly agree that we are integrating foundational sciences across their clerkship blocks.
And I also wanted to share with you some of the quotes that students have given us, their feedback, and we wanted really to include positive and not so positive. So you'll see that there are still challenges with application of this. So the positive quote says, my attendings are residents asking me questions about disease process, medication and surgical management, etc. help me integrate my basic science knowledge with clinical, making sure that this is included when appropriate during the clerkship is helpful. And this comes from our student who took our surgery clerkship, while the second example, again, is not so positive, and it says, I think it's difficult to integrate basic science. We somewhat did it when reading up on topics related to our patients in the inpatient setting, but many of the residents and attendings want to focus primarily on management and treatment plans, so objectives are slightly misaligned. And this comes from one of our students doing internal medicine rotation. So we see that there is still a work to do to really integrate and standardize our approach to this.
So in one specific clerkship, we looked at student performance on a comprehensive foundational science quiz as well. And this was comparable to scores on their clinical quizzes. So they are still using and applying their foundational sciences even in their clerkship blocks. And there was also qualitative data from the faculty who are participating in this, that there's deliberate pairing with the foundational and clinical faculty promoted teamwork within the group.
There's one question from the chat, and it says, I'm not so sure what integration really means. Is it what faculty do or how students think? Does anyone? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's students' perception of how the basic science is being integrated.
One of the good examples is we used to have 2 different exams. You know, we had USMLE Step 1 and USMLE Step 2. Now everything is kind of merged. USMLE became USMLE Step 1 became pass and fail. Now it's also allowed to be kind of done later. And so really, as Dr. Shamansky says, it is a perception of students while faculty work together. This is not something that didn't exist. We just wanted to emphasize.
Okay, so thanks for that. So we'll get into the wrapping up portion here. We'll have a summary of the barriers to integration, some of the lessons learned, and we'll move into the Q&A. So Dr. Shetty and Koestler, take it away.
Great, thank you, John. So as many of you practicing folks know, and basic science faculty who worked with those also realize the barriers are the unpredictable nature of clinical practice, what a day looks like, a variety of educational settings, which are outpatient, inpatient, different campuses with their own sort of subcultures. Some of the rotations have residents, some do not. So all those things add to a lot of variation. Of course, time constraints, overwhelming clinical demands, especially the time we've been trying to implement this was sort of as COVID was kind of calming down, but frankly, hospitals were inundated with all kinds of other things that had not been dealt with during sort of the peaks of COVID was another thing that occurred. I think a readiness to discuss foundational concepts in relation to clinical experiences, as happened in the as was reflected in the comment that was made, that residents and faculty are more interested in the aspect of taking care of patients and sort of direct clinical issues as opposed to really the integration. So we have some work to do with our faculty, our residents, fellows, etc., to encourage that exploring those aspects with students. Of course, recognizing the connection between clinical sciences and foundational sciences. And I think this is something we made a lot of strides in at the school by doing a very deliberate pairing. And we didn't just sort of pair people without thinking about it. So for instance, anatomists with surgeons, just it sort of made more sense. We had a physiologist, for instance, pairing up with OBGYN, Dr. Waite and Dr. Marshall paired up. And I think that led to sort of an easier conversation and understanding. Students not being challenged to make connections. Again, we sort of touched upon that. And it is difficult to capture bedside foundational teaching. Again, some of the barriers we've discussed. And let's not forget the age-old one, which is just simple resistance to change, which I think exists a little bit in all of us, but particularly throw in time-constrained patient volumes, etc., it becomes a bigger issue. Of course, there are many more, but these are the ones we sort of ran into and kind of tried to overcome the best we can and will continue to work on. I'll now hand over to Dr. Koestler.
There was a brief question, were these barriers cited by clinical faculty or students?
A little bit on both, I would say, and our observations as we've gone through this process, this is sort of the feedback we're getting from students, but also from faculty. So I would say both, and there's work to be done in educating faculty, residents, etc., to encourage more of this interaction and to explore basic science.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm going to talk now about the lessons learned and future directions. So there were a number of lessons learned, and I think the biggest take home is it wasn't as hard as we were making it out to be. There's opportunities that we realize that are in the existing curriculum, and more so that we're pursuing in our next steps. Those next steps include having more robust assessments, both of the students and the program, but also working with our instructional design team to think more about how we can be deliberate and utilize the material from our phase 1 curriculum, also throughout phases 2 and 3. In planning for the next iteration of our phase 2 and 3, we are also working very hard to map the foundational science content across the curriculum, really trying to focus in on those core conditions. So we recognized rather recently that the students who are going through phase 3 are assigned clinical conditions to be able to appreciate, develop differential diagnosis, be actively engaged in during those clerkship years. And what we're hoping to do is map those more deliberately to the core conditions that students are learning across our foundational science years to create more of a mental model and really reiterate that common language. 3 other things that we'll also be doing, we'll be exploring links to phase 1 content using QR codes and trying to link more deliberately within our learning management system. expand the partnerships beyond the current 3 clerkships into phases 2 and 3. And we're particularly interested in those advanced clinical rotations, including critical care, emergency medicine, and a sub-internship. And finally, we're exploring the aquifer and illness scripts as another modality to try to enhance the integration across the phases.
All right, thank you, Dr. Shetty and Koestler. So this brings us to our question and answer portion now, and I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Waite. I have to go facilitate a simulation with the medical students, so I'm going to excuse myself now and stop sharing my screen, and then Dr. Waite will share her screen, and we'll wrap up with the Q&A. So thanks, everyone. I enjoyed working with you this afternoon.
So I share the screen. You will see that. Oh, I cannot share the screen, but it doesn't matter. I have a thank you. Oh, here it goes. I have a thank you slide with all our, let's see, share screen. Okay, here it goes. Share the screen. And I have a thank you slide with all our emails, because as we all recognized, we are all on a journey for that. Our team started on this one and is certainly not at the end. And if anybody wants to collaborate with us, continue exchanging thoughts and successes and shortcomings, we would be more than happy to do so. With that, let's open the floor. I think there was one really good chat. I don't see the chat anymore, but there was a comment on framework and cognitive integration. That would be a good way to start us off.
Gabi, I'll read the question out. So, do you think one can successfully integrate foundational sciences into clinical teaching, such as clerkships, internships, without doing a comprehensive curriculum overhaul? I think you can. It's one of those instances where, you can sort of walk and chew gum at the same time, and it does not have to be part of a bigger process. I would say just implement, and one strategy might be to implement and start with brainstorming about a couple of clerkships and then share the ideas and then sort of implement in the others. Or you could do some brainstorming and sort of launch together, which is sort of what we did. But we started with working with places where there were clerkships, where there were already, there was a fair amount of basic science content already in the clinical clerkship, and we kind of built from that, shared ideas, and then implemented the entire project, if you will, together.
As Dr. Shetty said, and I'm just going to chime on of this, we're not surprised to find basic science in the clinical rotation material and end of exam. They were there. The question is, did the students recognize that? Could we help our clinical colleagues and work together into maybe focusing on the majority of the problem? So and providing them with the adequate material that will help them, or students in their search of basic science material, help them find it easier, was really not as extensive task as it looks like it is.
I also want to add in, Deborah Dalmedia also put in a comment that I thought was really intriguing. Forgive my pronunciation of your last name, but talking about this cognitive integration and faculty development portion, as a clinical educator and someone who has a very busy clinical practice, sometimes it is hard to remember to bring in that basic science. When I thought about my busy colleagues and I tried to integrate basic science into my clerkship, I wanted to make sure it was part of my core didactic portion that was in the clerkship, so that the students were not relying on the busy clinical faculty to instantly remember every basic science. What's the pharmacology of this GnRH agonist and the effect on bleeding, right? And so I may not always make that connection as a busy clinician. but it does speak to partnering with your faculty. So one, I held it in two hands. How do I make it accessible to my student without overburdening my faculty? And then how do I continue to engage my faculty development with my active educators and say, hey, we already do this naturally. Can you call it out? Can you say that this is pharmacology? Can you say that this is physiology or anatomy in the OR? When we're in the OR and looking at anatomy, that's low-hanging fruit. So being able to make it accessible for your faculty educator, but not totally relying on them, for me, was a really big win in my clerkship.
You know, I want to add to that, Brytanie, as we were discussing this and with others, what we did was we provided links to more detailed material, frankly, also so faculty members could get a refresh if they wanted. So it was sort of the material is available to both sides, and it allows for, you know, for people to say, oh, I forgot what X does. Let me just quickly look at that. So, and sort of, so it's empowering both faculty, residents, etc., as well as the students. So if a student wants to dig more, it's like, oh, I don't remember seventh nerve, they can go sort of to the link and look it up. And we plan to enhance that even more as we go ahead.
There's another question from Charles. Do you think it's easier to do the foundational science integration into discrete clerkships or start with longitudinal integrated clerkships? And I can speak on our behalf what we did, because we sequentially designed phase 1 and then phase 2. So what we did in phase 1, we had a backward design where we had a clinician designing with the basic scientist the clinically relevant content in the basic science, and that helped us enormously, because that team already existed. That was our person who made the connection then into the clinical clerkship, and that made the connection that the basic science that had somebody, a core person to reach out to, and that's where we made those teams. Where then when we designed phase 2, the clinical one, we already had existing teams which started to communicate. And then we emphasized on this communication that Brytanie said we are also busy. So we kind of created that framework longitudinally, because our design was first phase 1 and then phase 2. That would be my answer. It doesn't need to be that way, but communication, it's very basic. It has to be intentional. Otherwise, like Leanne said, it works initially, but it disappears. So it's so challenging in our busy worlds to keep doing this.
I know the hour is late, but just a very quick comment for Charles too. We started out with a full year longitudinal integrated clerkships and have gradually moved to the block model for clerkship, if that's what you were asking. And having had experience in both of those models, I think it would be feasible to do this in either format. So for example, the IM version that I'm speaking about, I use that asynchronous virtual session with each block of students at the end of the clerkship, sort of as a clerkship wrap up. And really the best part of all is that we use a platform that we can have the students sign into that platform using a number that makes them anonymous. But we can not only track the group responses, but we can track the individual student responses. So we can look at that data, and we don't have a full year because we just have been through block 3 now, but we can look at that data and look at the basic science elements that are weaker in student response to inform how we educate the students. And we can look at individual student performance as well. So I think it could be used anywhere, really, either format.
You know, very personal point of view, I think though it is easier to do with blocks. I think it is feasible to do in either, but I suspect it might be easier, if that's the question, Charles.
I definitely am thinking that myself. it must be extremely difficult to do it with integrated, especially in community settings like we have, where they are going back and forth, back and forth. The consistency, the number of trainers differ, but with blocks that are blocked-based clerkships, I can imagine it's so much easier, at least administratively, let alone with communication. But I'm glad to hear that, for example, from Dr. Shoemaker, that it is possible for both. I mean, of course, theoretically possible for both, but that it may actually be okay.
You know, we just to build on what Dr. Shoemaker said, we had the LIC first the whole year, and then 6 months LIC, 6 month kind of like blocks for a while. And we had a sort of half day block for didactic sessions and OSCE reviews, and those, you know, different kind of things were built into those agendas. And there you can get uniformity in that way. It's not perfect, but it actually worked better than you might imagine. So it is feasible, is what I'm trying to say. Just as you pointed out as well, Charles, it is a little harder, but definitely you can do it. And we were happy to help with any suggestions as we go along.
That's
And with
wonderful. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to have to bring this to a close because we are technically over time now, and I appreciate everybody sticking around and participating in today, and huge thank you to this incredible team. It was a great webinar and we appreciate it. The recording will get posted more than likely tomorrow morning since I have to leave and run some errands this afternoon. But things will be posted, and John said he would give me the handout to share with everybody. So thank you again, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.